Thank you for joining us for the Going Beyond Network Screening webinar. I'd like to start out by introducing our presenters for today's session. Today I'm joined by Danny Anderson, our VP of Product here at Numetric, where Danny is responsible for driving the roadmap of our traffic safety analytics solutions. Danny has an inherent skill for understanding customer challenges and advocating for their needs to produce industry-leading solutions. Danny is also joined by Jake Moai. Jake is a Senior Customer Success Manager and Pre-Sales Engineer here at Numetric. Jake is a civil engineer by trade and has a passion for helping customers realize success from day one of their engagement with Numetric. With that, I will turn the time over to Danny and Jake.
All right. Before we jump into the discussion and demo, I want to touch on what we'll cover in this webinar. By the end of the webinar, we should be able to answer the following questions. What's preventing effective rankings in states? How can a data-focused approach change this? What would this look like with a cloud-based solution? And how can we implement a better solution for network screening? So let's begin by aligning with what is network screening. The FHWA defines it like this: network screening is the process of analyzing the network to identify sites for further investigation. It is not possible to conduct a detailed investigation at each site in the entire network. So network screening pares down the list of sites across the network to a manageable list. So what does this mean to us? It means that network screening is the first step to assigning resources. That means if we don't prioritize the right projects, no matter how good our teams are, we won't maximize our resources because they're not focused in the right areas. So what is the current state of network screening? How is it being performed right now? As we're out in the market, we see it performed one of three ways right now. The first, states will commission local universities to create network screening reports for them. The states do this by providing their information to the university. The university analyzes the data for about 6 to 12 months, then provides the state a network screening report. There are two big issues with this approach. There is no knowledge transfer. The people using this report don't understand what went into it. And the second big issue is every time a group needs a new report, they have to go through this process again. The second way network screening is being implemented, by building an in-house tool. These tools are usually built by and for a small group of users for a specific use case. That means as soon as the needs change at all, the tool is useless. In addition, you have the same knowledge transfer problem. The people getting the reports, this tool is a black box to them and they don't understand what went into the report. Also, usability was never a requirement for an in-house tool, which makes adoption difficult. The third way that we see people pursuing network screening is there's still a group using manual processes. They rely on reports coming in from the field throughout the year. They then rank these requests against each other in order to create their network screening report. There's not really a need to discuss why this is problematic, but I would point out what drives this kind of behavior. It comes from two things, either a lack of access to the data or a lack of trust in the data. So let's talk about a couple of more challenges for network screening, and we won't go too deep. This is the water you swim in every day. You understand these things. So no one approach fits all needs. Network screening is currently a monolithic approach, but the rankings need to vary greatly. Your approach to network screening needs to vary as well. Less knowledge transfer to internal teams. This past week, and we touched on this knowledge transfer, but at TRB, Barbara Cohen, Chief Data Officer at Colorado DOT, said, the more people look at our data, the better our data gets. So what does this mean to us? It means the more the data gets spread within a department, the better your odds are of correcting errors and making data usable. Each new search takes hours. This not only kills efficiency, but it kills adoption. You shouldn't have to wait for your data. Data growth brings paralysis. So access to data continues to grow, but being inundated with unusable data leads to paralysis. You need a tool that doesn't inundate you with data, but rather provides insights from your data. And there's a host of measurements for network screening. There's always new advances in measurements. However, some of the old measurements are still very valuable. Your network screening approach needs to utilize a multiple ranking method system. So we've talked a lot about the challenges of network screening. But what are the benefits of network screening when you do it with a data-driven approach? The FHWA created a white paper that documented this for us. When you take a data-driven approach to network screening, the data-driven approach identifies the project sites with the highest overall benefit, it identifies the projects with the greatest return on investment, and it delivers an additional $4.3 million worth of benefits for every $10 million budgeted towards safety. These results illustrate the three goals of the DDSA initiative. 1, make more informed decisions. 2, optimize investments. And 3, reduce serious and fatal crashes. So, what makes Numetric's approach different? Let's talk about that. It all begins with the data. The base data that DOTs have to work with is not easy. This data includes spatial data, it includes relational data, it includes all kinds of various data sorts. There's a technical challenge simply to house all of this data in a single location, let alone combining it for meaningful insights. The traffic safety data platform is a cloud-based solution that requires no hardware purchase and no hardware configuration and connects to all types of data sources. We've constructed a robust platform that is meant to take various data sets which may or may not have relationship with each other to provide insights. The first way the Numetric platform does this is through enhanced searchability. For data to be used, it must be read by humans. Think about it this way. When a police officer enters in the manner of collision into a report, it's usually given a number. The number is the only way the system understands the manner of collision. It's not an angle crash, it's a number 4. Our platform transforms those numbers or codes into human readable language. We even go further than this. We apply logic to the data to create searchable transformations. Countermeasure transformations are a great example of how having more data provides greater insight. The rumble strips countermeasure combines crash data, asset data, and LRS data. With our partners, we create logic for when a crash could be mitigated by a specific countermeasure, like rumble strips. Once this is done, a user can simply query the word rumble strips, and they will be presented with all of the crashes where applying rumble strips would mitigate the crashes. The next way the Numetric platform addresses the challenges of data is through enforced consistency. Numetric understands that there is a level of trust that must be achieved in order for organizations to adopt software, and data consistency is at the heart of that trust. Beyond the normal QA/QC processes, Numetric provides reports based on the data provided. Consider crash reports. Crash reports can include a mile point and a geo point. Numetric creates reports to understand when those pieces of information contradict, and we can even recommend which one is correct. The third way the Numetric platform addresses the challenges of data is by delivering performance. From its foundation, Numetric's platform was built on 3 things: big data, speed, usability. The normal expectation when using an analytics tool is that you'll need to understand SQL and that your queries are going to take a significant amount of time. Numetric uses natural language searches for their queries. That means if you can use Google, you can use the Numetric apps. Also, most of our queries are instantaneous. So what does that mean to you? This provides users at all technical levels with an easier, better experience. This allows for wider adoption and higher usage. And going back to Barbara Cohen's quote, the more people using it, the better your data gets. So on that note, before we go any further, I want to point something out. Often at this point, we have people start getting nervous and they begin thinking, our data isn't good enough. There's one thing I can definitely tell you right now. Your data is good enough. We have partners at all different levels in their data and all benefit from what Numetric can provide. So on top of the Numetric platform sit Numetric's lines of purpose-built applications. What are purpose-built applications? Purpose-built apps support safety teams, especially as they work through the roadway safety management process. These apps are easy to use and powerful, which leads to greater adoption. These apps enable faster, deeper analysis. So what are we hearing from the field about our apps? It was very cool. At TRB, we were told this. When we use Numetric with mayors and local officials, emotions go away and the data comes forward. Don't we all want to have that exact same experience? So let's look at what that experience looks like. Let's jump into Numetric's network screening application. All right. Before we jump into this too far, let's orient ourselves. Let's understand what we're looking at. Right here at the top, we have the search bar. We'll be using this bar in the demo, so we're not going to go too far into it. But I do want you to notice a couple things. Notice that there is no technical language, and notice that you can see exactly what's happening at all times. Over here on the left, you see a map of Utah. Utah is a good partner of ours, so we'll be using Utah for this network screening demo. The coloring on the map signifies the ranking thresholds for each individual segment. On the right, we have the top 50 segments, as well as the measurements you can rank the segments by. These measurements are total crashes, fatal crashes, crash ratio, crash rate, and crashes per mile. So let's discuss what information network screening utilizes. Both on the map and in the list, you have segments. So why segments? Segments are important because they allow us to group roadways in a way that they can be compared later on. If states already have segments, we can use those segments. If states don't have segments, Numetric can help states create their segments. Once you have the segments, you can create SPFs, or expected crash rates. With these functions, states can now compare how a specific segment is performing against roadways with the same characteristics. If states already have their SPFs, Numetric can use those. If states don't have SPFs, Numetric can help create those functions. Once you have expected crash rates based on the SPFs, you can divide the segment's crash rate by the expected crash rate. We call this the crash ratio. Crash ratio provides quick understanding of how a segment is performing compared to roadways with the same characteristics. All right, so that's a lot of talking. Let's jump into this, right? So for this demo, Jake here will be a traffic safety engineer, and I will be requesting information from him. Jake will then walk us through his process for getting the information. These scenarios I will throw at Jake represent a small fraction of what is thrown at you every single day. What I want you to notice is how quickly and gracefully Numetric's network screening supports Jake as he fulfills these requests. So you ready, Jake?
I'm ready, Danny.
All right. So for this first scenario, Jake is going to be in Region 3 in Utah. UDOT has made raised medians a best practice. Jake is asked to identify the top 10 places where raised medians should be implemented in his region. Before he does this, however, I want everyone who can hear my voice to think, how would I do this right now? How would I go to a region and identify the top 10 places where raised medians should be placed? All right, Jake, you ready?
Okay.
Okay.
So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to come to my search bar. And as Danny mentioned, it works just like Google search. So I can type in region, select that, and then select the region that I'm in, which is Region 3. By adding that attribute, I've filtered out all the data or noise that doesn't pertain to what I want to look at. As you can see, the heat map has re-rendered to show the high crash rate locations in Region 3, and the table has also updated. I have a new ranking based on the filter, Region 3, that I've selected, but I still maintain that statewide perspective. I have my segments and the mile points and some high-level calculations and values. Now, Danny asked me to identify where raised medians could be placed as part of a new best practice that the state is implementing. So, where are raised medians typically placed? I can't hear you all, but I'm sure you're all saying two-way undivided roads. So I'm going to go to my filter bar and start to type in two-way undivided roads. And as I type in the word two, I have a list of attributes that span several data sets with the word two in it. I see two-way, not divided, so I select that. In making that selection, I've rescreened the entire Region 3 network to identify what roads in Region 3 were two-way undivided. Now that I have my list, I can generate a report for Danny showing the top 10 segments, but I want to do a little more high-level digging. I noticed by looking at this table that the 6th ranked segment has a higher number of crashes than the other segments. So before I send Danny that report, I want to take a few minutes to look around. So I'm going to click on that row of data. You can see on the left, the map zooms into the location, and I get an information panel on the right showing some additional information for this segment, including how it's ranked over the past 3 years. You can see in 2015, this segment was ranked 235th in the state, and today it's in the top 50. We also have a summary of calculations, roadway details like AADT and functional class, and some recommended countermeasures that can mitigate the most number of crashes along that route. There is also a Google Street View of the location that the user can interact directly within the application. So as I travel up and down this segment of road, I can quickly confirm that this is indeed a two-way undivided road, and I also recognize this location. This location in Utah is called the Silicon Slopes. It is the fastest growing job market in Utah, and this road leads to one of the fastest growing real estate markets in Utah. So one can expect to see an increase in traffic. I can now fulfill Danny's request of the top 10 segments by selecting the Generate Report button. So I can give this a name of Region 3 Raised Medians. I can select the top 10, and it was requested by Danny Anderson. So as I create that report, very quickly and easily, I have a cleanly formatted report showing statistics from the table within the application. And as I scroll down, we've broken out each individual segment to show the total number of crashes, crash severity distribution, and we've included a few additional calculations like fatality rate and serious crash rate. We've also broken the entire segment into smaller chunks to identify hotspots and visualize serious and fatal crashes along the route. I have each of the top 10 segments broken out in the same manner that I can now save and email to Danny or print off and drop off on his desk.
Perfect. Thanks, Jake. So, a couple of takeaways. Jake eliminated the noise. Jake was able to focus on what he was responsible for. Another takeaway is, during the course of what Jake was doing, Jake actually looked at 3 completely different network screenings. Jake fulfilled the request, and Jake delivered a report in minutes. So one question I'd have at this time is, we thought about, before Jake started, how we would do this. Now I'd ask you to think, how does that differ from what Jake just did? All right, let's give Jake another scenario. All right, Jake, scenario 2, clear out your bar. Okay, scenario 2, in this scenario, Utah has been given a grant to widen shoulders. Jake has transferred to Region 1 and has been asked to provide the top 10 roadways where widening the shoulders could mitigate crashes. Once again, before Jake jumps into this, I want everybody to ask ourselves the question, how would I identify the top 10 places within an area where widening shoulders should be applied? You ready, Jake?
Let's do it.
All right.
So I'm going to start the exact same way I started the previous one, by filtering out the noise. And so now that I've been transferred to Region 1, I can select Region and Region 1. Now Region 1 is in northern Utah and is predominantly rural. And so now that I've rescreened all of Region 1, I need to find where shoulder widening could be implemented. So I can go back to my filter bar and start to type in shoulder widening. And you'll see an attribute in the data called shoulder widening from a column of data called countermeasures. Now, this is a column of data created by Numetric in conjunction with the state DOT. And we recognize attribute patterns based on logic that spans across several different data sets. So as I select shoulder widening as a potential countermeasure, my region has re-rendered and the table has updated. Now this table is showing my region and state rankings, and each of the crashes in the table are crashes that could have potentially been mitigated by having widened shoulders. The first thing I notice are the top two segments are from the same route. They're continuous segments. So I want to do a little bit of exploring by hopping into my Google Street View. So I can select that top segment and I have my Google Street View available. And I can look at the surroundings of these two segments. I notice that it is a rural area and that there is little to no shoulder along this route. I can consider additional attributes for these two segments to look into as well. And then I can generate a report and fire that off to Danny.
Very cool. Thanks, Jake. So once again, I'd ask everybody to ask yourself the question, how was what I was going to do different from what Jake was going to do? A couple of takeaways I had from the scenario of what Jake was doing is, once again, Jake actually performed 3 completely different network screenings. Jake also utilized countermeasures to quickly identify where crashes could have been mitigated. And Jake fulfilled the request and shot off a report really quickly, so that's pretty cool. All right, let's try one that's a little different. This is a little bit more of a behavioral report. So Salt Lake County wants to start a safe pedestrian initiative. Before they begin, they want to understand where their biggest problems are and hopefully understand something more than just numbers. So we're going to ask Jake to quickly come up with 3 things that may be driving accidents involving pedestrians. These aren't meant to be definitive, but a starting place. So once again, I would ask you, this is thrown in your lap. What's your process for approaching this? What are you going to do? All right, Jake, you ready?
Okay. So this time, I'm going to start out by filtering down to pedestrian-involved crashes, because I can search by any attribute within my data. So as I type in pedestrian, you'll see several different pedestrian attributes across the several different columns of data. So we at Numetric have created a new column of data for our end users that takes this information and creates a new column titled pedestrian-related crashes to make sure that we encompass all crashes that have involved a pedestrian. I can now add that filter. And because I'm looking for Salt Lake County, I can now add that additional filter for Salt Lake County. And this will rescreen my network. As you've seen, it doesn't matter what order you add the attributes in, whether you add a location first and crash attributes or countermeasures second. So as I look at some of the results in my table, I realize I don't want to screen my county's network by crash rate. Instead, I want to identify these segments based on the total number of crashes. So to rescreen the network, I don't need to start over. I can simply click on the crashes column, and within seconds, it will rescreen my network and re-rank it. The map re-renders, and I'm ready to dive into the top ranked segment. Now, Danny is asking for a few things that may contribute to pedestrian-related crashes. So I'll do a quick look at my segment. I'll hop into Google Street View, and right off the bat, I noticed that the Utah track system is going directly through the center of the street. So these are fairly wide intersections for pedestrians to walk across, and there's some obstruction with the tracks equipment. As I travel down the street, on the left-hand side, I see the Salt Lake City Library. This is a pretty amazing library at over 240,000 square feet. And it's a huge attraction for families and students at the nearby university. So this draws a lot of foot traffic. Now, most of the foot traffic, we can assume, to the library are coming from the track system. So as I go to the closest track stop, I notice, first of all, I spot a pedestrian about 10 feet in front of the Google vehicle. And as I continue to look at the track stop, I notice there are a few other jaywalkers leaving the track stop. As I look at that stop, one thing I quickly realize is that there's an abrupt end to that sidewalk. So any commuter wanting to travel east has to cross the street, has to jaywalk since the sidewalk abruptly ends. So very quickly, in just a few minutes, I've been able to identify a few potential contributions to pedestrian-related crashes in the track system, a library which draws a lot of foot traffic, as well as some issues that may be considered at the track stop. Now, this isn't the end of an analysis, obviously, but it's just the beginning. And it took just a few minutes to discover these things.
Awesome. So once again, with this analysis, Jake viewed 4 completely different network screenings because of the filters he added and because of sorting and ranking. Jake was able to see the data differently than if he would have just been given, you had 28 crashes on this route. He was able to understand what's happening in the ecosystem a little bit better. I sound like a broken record here, but I want you to think about how you would have approached this and how Jake did it, and how much different is that approach. All right, we're gonna end on one more scenario, and I want to really push Jake on this one. Jake, I want you to tell me something I can do to improve the worst segment in Utah, and give me some insight into the benefit I would actually receive for doing the project. So once again, I'm going to ask everybody, how would you do this right now? What does that time look like? Jake's been asked to identify what to do on the worst segment in Utah and what benefits can we expect. All right, Jake, ready?
Okay. So as Danny was talking, I've cleared out my filters, and I've also rescreened and re-ranked my network based on crash rate. And as shown before, I can do that by any of the attributes within that table. So let's select that top ranked segment, Route 48, and let's open this in safety analysis. So we've gone from network screening, which takes kind of that 30,000 foot view of our network, to safety analysis, where we're now focused on this 2-mile segment of road. So within safety analysis, I can see here on the map each of the individual crashes along that route and where they occur. So I actually want to change my map view to show satellite view so I can see my surroundings a little bit better. On the right-hand side, I also see the top 3 countermeasures or treatments to implement based on benefit. I have an almost $7 million benefit for adding traffic signals along this route. I can see below that there are 54 crashes that meet the criteria of adding a traffic signal. And I also see where these crashes are occurring along that 2-mile route there on the bottom. I can also view this broken down segmentation by cost. And so I click on benefit, and I can quickly see where I can get the most benefit, the most bang for my buck. And that's at the end of section 1.8, milepost 1.8 to the end, to milepost 2. So I can go up to my top filter bar, and I can edit my milepost to show 1.8 to 2. So now I'm looking at all of the crashes along this shortened segment, and now I can add a filter of a countermeasure of traffic signal. So I come up and select the countermeasure column and select traffic signal. Now I'm looking at the 20 crashes that could have been mitigated by a traffic signal based on the logic that we've written. Now I noticed that these are tightly clustered at an intersection, which I would expect, and I want to do a little bit deeper of a dive into these crashes. So I can select on this metrics button, and here I get additional information about these crashes. One thing I notice is that as I scroll down, each of these crashes are angle crashes. And so I'll stop there, Danny. But the next step in this safety analysis module and application would be to add a treatment, for instance, traffic signal, to calculate the benefit cost ratio per the highway safety manual methodologies. But I will leave a full review of the safety analysis overview for another day, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's good. That's actually pretty amazing when you think about it. We went from not really understanding much about this segment, but kind of being told this is where we need to look, to zoning in on a specific intersection where one treatment could give us a $4 million benefit. That's actually pretty powerful. Heather, that's what we have for you today.
Excellent. So we're going to go ahead and open it up to questions. So just a reminder, on your Zoom toolbar, you should see a little, it looks like a little folder with a Q on it for Q&A. We have had a couple of questions come in that I'm going to go ahead and get this kicked off with. But if you do have questions, you can go ahead and put those into that Q&A tool. So the first question, Danny and Jake, that we had come in, and as you guys know, we get this question a lot when we're presenting to states, right, to different agencies. How much of what you've shown in the demo is configurable and can be modified to a specific state?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way that I'd answer this is Numetric's a partner. We need what we're building to work for our partners. So almost everything's configurable by the state. When we talk about getting benefits, those CMFs come from the state. When we talk about the segments, if the segments don't work for the state, like we work with the state. So almost everything Numetric does is configurable. The cool thing that we've done is we've put processes in place so that states don't need to think about the stuff that doesn't necessarily pertain to them and focus on what does. And then they can let us know how to implement that into the application. So almost everything you've seen is a partnership between us and the states we work with.
Perfect. So another question that has come in is, as it relates to crashes, our crashes are not well located. How would our experience and results be different than what you showed?
Okay, that's a great question.
So, I mean,
I'll let Danny take that one, sorry.
I've been asking Jake to take this, and he probably should, but I want to. So being able to visualize the crashes, like this is what we can do for states. Now, the cool thing is, and we alluded to this earlier, is states need to trust their data. They need to be able to trust what they're seeing is accurate. So we have a feedback loop connected so that if there are crashes that don't match where they should be, we can actually let the states know that before their people do. Otherwise, we can perform all the same things that you've seen, and you'd be able to get this type of visibility into your crashes at any time, if that makes sense. Like you shouldn't expect a different experience other than to say it's not going to be the state of Utah, it's going to be whatever state you're working with, but we can apply these things. We apply them to all of the partners we work with.
Perfect. So another question has come in, and this is somewhat related to the first question about how much of what we've shown is configurable. I have a question asking, what if we have our own SPF?
Yeah, great question. So actually, if you look and read about SPFs and CMFs, You should have your own SPFs and you should have your own CMFs. They are supposed to be very location specific for different parts of the country. So if you have yours, that's great. We can plug them right in and we can start using them. But there's a lot of states we've talked to who don't have them, and we have a path forward for you as well. We can help those states who don't have those SPFs, we can create those. But to the first point, like, we're not looking to tell the states what SPFs they should use, like there's one golden rule. They need to be done within states, within your own roadways. So if you have them and you have a high level of trust in them, we can use them right away.
Perfect. So this is a follow-up question from the previous question that we asked, which is, what do we see as the feedback loop as it relates to poor crash locations in states?
That is a great question with the feedback loop. So with poor locations, there are typically two ways to handle that. One, as Danny mentioned before, we have crash data that has geolocation data as well as data that is mapped to their LRS. And so what Numetric is able to do is essentially take either of those points. Now, with some information that has neither of those or both of those or poor, Numetric has a way of identifying which locations are poor, and the feedback loop would essentially go back to our contacts at the DOT. Now, this doesn't slow down the process of users gaining access and accessibility to these crashes, because with a poor location, the attributes associated with each of these crashes are still very, very critical and important. And so we still do include all of those attributes pertaining to the crash or the vehicle or the occupant, and still moving things forward with analysis. I hope that was helpful. But there is always, as Danny mentioned, we're partners. There's always a continuous loop to try to improve data quality and insights out of their data.
Okay, perfect. I've had a housekeeping question come up as well, so I'll just address that, which is, will a recording of this session be made available? I'd like to share with other people. Yes, you will receive an email from me with a link to a recording of this webinar. And I'm not going to wrap up now. We're still going to take more questions because I have a couple more, but I did want to just include a couple of these takeaways for those of you that are interested in learning more. You can visit our website. You will get that recording. And then I've included Jake's email here, not because Jake is more important than Danny.
He is.
No, I'm not.
But just for one primary point of contact for questions and feedback, and Jake will definitely get you to the right place. So question that just has come in is around, does Numetric show its benefit cost ratio calculations? There are some individuals in my organization that are skeptical of benefit cost ratios provided by consultants or software companies like yourself.
Yeah. So whoever asked this question, I want to come and give you a hug, because this is at the heart of everything that needs to start happening with these kind of tools. There needs to be clarity. There needs to be transparency. There needs to be this level of trust. So yes, we do. We're trying to put every single calculation that we do in a hover in the app so that people can understand, how do you calculate benefit? How do you calculate the benefit cost? How do you get the numbers that you're showing me? Because this goes back to Barbara Cohn's point, right? The more people who see this and the more people who try to think this through, the more good answers you get. We have a lot of quality people working in these DOTs, and some of them aren't able to talk to us about improvements because of so many black boxes that they just don't understand. So yes, we do include the benefit calculation. We don't hide it from anybody. We put these things into our app so that they can be understood by everybody. And so that level of trust is there.
Perfect. Thanks, Danny. Next question is, how frequently can our crash data be uploaded and made available for some of the screening and analysis that you guys have shown?
That's a great question, and Numetric has created a flexible platform that is able to ingest new data periodically. So it can be done actually in real time with real connections to the crash database. Numetric also has a REST API where the state or city or county can push data to Numetric at whatever frequency that they prefer. And we also have a way to manually upload data. We understand that every state's technical capabilities are at different levels. And so whether some states are just manually uploading spreadsheets or pushing us data or connecting to the database at a on a real-time basis, we can handle and encompass each of those different situations. So really the data, how frequently can the data be updated into Numetric? That's really a question for the state, city, or municipality to answer. And whatever they're comfortable with, Numetric can take.
Perfect, thanks, Jake. I've got another question here. Can Numetric analyze intersections?
Oh, can Numetric analyze intersections? It's the golden question, right? I think last I saw, about 32% of all crashes are happening in intersections in some of the places we're working. Yes, we can. What we demonstrated today, we have a finite amount of time. What we demonstrated today was very segment roadway specific. But Numetric can do network screening on intersections as well. There's different math that goes into the crash ratio or crash rate, as you would expect. But we rely on the access management guide as well as the highway safety manual to help us or to lend guidance. But we also analyze it and take all the heavy lifting off of the state so that they can get their intersections network screening instantaneously, just like you saw for segments. So I just took a lot of time to say the answer is yes.
It was very well stated.
Thank you.
So next question that I have is, give me an idea of setup and implementation. This is like a robust system.
Okay. This is a robust system. However, the system has been created in order to implement this fairly quickly. The back end and data ingestion and app creation is one where Numetric, as we mentioned before, partners very closely with the state. Now, each state is different in its own sense. They collect different attributes of crash data. They do their SPFs. Their SPFs are unique. Their CMFs are unique. And so implementation of these apps is customized based on what the state has and what they need. Numetric provides several services that some states will need and others won't. If you're looking for ballpark numbers and timing, the answer, again, varies between a few months to probably between 2 and 4 months for implementation. I know that's kind of a big window, but it doesn't take long for Numetric to partner with their states and get these apps spun up.
Perfect. Thanks, Jake. So next question is, who can have access to the system?
Yeah, so that very much is a question for the state or whoever's purchasing Numetric. Numetric licenses differently than most other software providers. I think hopefully my answers about transparency have been pretty clear about what Numetric's mission is. We want everybody using this. We want if a state DOT is using it, we want their regions using it. We want the cities to use it. We want that clarity. So Numetric licenses aren't a per user license. They're a site license. So DOTs can give it to all the people who are going to be working on projects or who are going to need insight into this. If DOTs need to share their licenses with engineering firms, it's a different step, but that can be done as well. We're looking to give as much information to the DOT and to the people who are working on projects as possible.
Perfect. Thanks, Danny. So the next question that's come in is, does using Numetric require that our crash data is in the cloud?
Yeah, so Numetric essentially takes a copy of the state's crash data, and we do host it in the cloud. And so, yes, the data we host, in order to maintain the speed and performance that you've seen, Numetric has configured their backend in a way where where the data needs to be hosted in the cloud. I guess, again, like Danny, this is a long answer to say yes.
Okay, perfect. So the next question that has come in is around segments being defined. What if we don't have our segments defined?
Yeah, so fundamentally, we get some questions about why do I need segments, first of all, and the reason why you need to have segments is to start really working on understanding the systemic approach to network safety and traffic and understanding where crashes are happening. So with segment creation is the key to it, to understand segments and be able to classify them. So some states we've worked with have segments, but all they did was take all of the segments of road, broke them into 1/10 of a mile segment, and called those segments. That's not how we define segments. We define segments with roadways that have like characteristics so they can be compared to each other. So we know that even though a road that only has about 7 crashes on it, but it's a rural road with an ADT of 100, and it's had 7 crashes over the last 3 years, like compared to roadways of that type, that's a road that we need to go check. So Numetric's created tools to be able to not only chop the roadway up into segments, but then to be able to bucketize them and start creating safety performance functions to give even greater insight to the states and local users.
Perfect. Thanks, Danny. Yeah. So the next question that has come in is, how can Numetric help plan and program systemic safety improvements?
I have a short answer. It looks like Danny and I may be fighting over this one, but I'll be very brief in this, and that Numetric is trying to, is coming up with a systemic approach to help identify just the most efficient and consistent ways of screening a network and providing those treatments that give the best benefit.
Yeah, so I would just push further and say, and this kind of goes back to the last question, answer is, if you're always treating the symptom, you're not going to get healthier. Like, this goes back to going to the doctor. If the doctor's always just trying to treat the one symptom and there's something else that's actually driving it, you're going to keep getting that symptom. So systemic approaches are where the industry is going, and for good reason, because we need to stop, instead of making a roadway that's unsafe, having crashes on it, and then going and fixing it, we need to stop creating roadways like that. Or if we know something is a very safe practice, and we need to start implementing that at a higher level. So Numetric has systemic approaches within their models. We're also driving at some very futuristic, very cool things that hopefully we'll have a webinar, I'm guessing sometime around the summer, based around what we're doing with a systemic approach. But I would just say, if you are pushing towards systemic approaches, you need to look at what you're doing, because it's going to come and you're going to have to catch up with the rest of the industry if you're not doing it already.
Perfect. Thanks, Danny and Jay. So have another question, somewhat again related to the things being predefined, can we set the list of attributes that you were showing in the network screening ranking? Or is that something that you guys give us a list and we can't modify?
Yeah. So that table you saw of how we rescreen the network, that can be customizable, as well as the attributes that you saw us type into the filter bar. Now, we used several examples today and attributes of the data, but that's not everything. So if the attribute actually exists in any of the data sets that we've pulled in that Danny has mentioned that go into at least our network screening application, crash data, roadway information, asset inventories as well, you are able to utilize any attribute across any of those data sets in order to rescreen your network.
So I guess, like, just to make it clear, you're not limited. If you want it, it's there, right? There's no reason to go and like configure a checkbox. The only reason I say this is because I've seen some of these. You don't need to configure those things. You should be able to use that natural language search and say, I need to look at where runoff the roads happened, and just type in runoff the road and be done with it.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Danny and Jake. We've got time for one last question. And again, for any questions that we have not gotten to, we will respond to those questions. We will make this recording available. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. We appreciate you taking time out for this. So there's one last question that has come in is, my data is all over the map. We have some issues with cleanliness, and I know I've heard this from several states when we've met with them. How is Numetric able to help me assess where we should focus on these areas?
So we've talked about this feedback loop that Numetric has in partnership and partnering with state and local agencies. It all, as Danny mentioned, it all starts with the data. So Numetric's first thing that they do is a data assessment to look to see what the state of the data is and to kind of create a baseline of where the state's at. So that way we know where to improve and to get moving and started in implementing the application. We didn't show any of it here, and I'm sure another webinar may be warranted for this, but Numetric's backend is very powerful in when it brings and pulls in data and information from each of these different data sets. Numetric can create a lot of data transformations or data cleansing rules. So as data comes into Numetric, it runs through these rules seamlessly and gives an output that is understandable and digestible for the end users.
Perfect. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Danny. We really appreciate the content that you guys have prepared and your perspective. As Danny and Jake have mentioned, we are going to be hosting future webinars. We're going to be doing this on a very regular basis on other topic areas. I'd welcome your feedback and perspective on things that you guys would like to hear. On the screen, you can see Jake's email if you want to drop Jake a note, or I'm sure several of you heard from other members of our team, Todd, David Lyon. So if you have additional questions, let us know. If you're interested in learning more and having a specific conversation about your state or agency, let us know. Thank you for the time, and we hope everyone has a great rest of the day and week. Take care. Bye-bye.